Welcome to the Human Capital Innovations Podcast. We're your source for personal, professional, and organizational growth and development, where we share original research, explore industry trends, and interview executives and thought leaders from across the globe. We hope you join us often for practitioner-oriented content around all things related to leadership, HR, talent management, organizational development, and change management. Maximize your personal and organizational potential with Human Capital Innovations Podcast. Do you enjoy the Human Capital Innovations Podcast? Please subscribe, leave a review, comment, share, and consider supporting the podcast on Patreon, even at the producer and sponsorship levels. Welcome to the Human Capital Innovations Podcast. In this HCI Podcast episode, I talk with Adam Kahane about leading as facilitating, that leadership is not telling staff what to do, but enabling people to work together. Adam Kahane, welcome to the Human Capital Innovations Podcast.
Thank you, Jonathan.
It is a pleasure to be with you today. You're joining us from the UK. I'm south of Salt Lake City in Utah. And today we're going to be talking about the topic around your recent book, Leading as Facilitating, that leadership is not telling staff what to do, but enabling people to work together more effectively and collaboratively. So I think that will be a really fun conversation. Before we get started, I just wanted to share Adam's bio with everybody. Adam Kahane is director of Rios Partners, an international social enterprise that helps people move forward together on their most important and intractable issues. Adam is a leading organizer, designer, and facilitator of processes through which businesses, government, and civil society leaders can work together to address such challenges. He has worked in more than 50 countries in every part of the world with executives and politicians, generals and guerrillas, civil servants and trade unionists, communist activists and United Nations officials, clergy and artists. That's quite the list. You've done it all. It's a pleasure to have you with me today to have this nice conversation. Anything else you would like to share with listeners by way of your background, personal context before we dive on in?
No, I think you said communist activists. I have worked with communist activists, but I think that was supposed to say community activists. So I work, I would say, more often with community activists in general than specifically with communist activists. But anyway.
Yes, that is so funny. That's what my mind read on the page. That's great. Community activists and communist activists. That's fantastic. Yes. The point is you've done a lot with a lot of different types of people and stakeholders and leaders. And I think that's really important.
Yeah, thanks. So yes, that's been what I've done and what my colleagues and I do all day, every day for the past 30 years. And yeah, this whole area of how can we work together with diverse others, inside our organization, outside our organization, including people we don't agree with or like or trust. This has been the center of my work over the last 30 years.
Yeah, fantastic. So as we get started, you've written many books, lots of great topics we could discuss. I thought we would just focus on your recent book, Leading as Facilitating. And maybe you can start off by just framing up for us the general premise behind the book and why this book, why now, why is it so important?
Okay, so I have written 5 books, but they all say the same thing. So it's not as impressive as it sounds. I'm a man who's only had one idea, although I think it's a good idea. And the one idea is that, or I think it's an important idea. And that one idea is that in order to deal with the challenges we face, we increasingly need to collaborate with diverse others. Whether that's inside organizations or on community or national or global issues, that's what I've seen. And the books have been trying to develop the practice and theory for that work. The most recent book which you referred to includes this idea that I'm looking forward to talking about with you, which is what would leadership as facilitation look like? The actual title of the book is different. The book is actually called Facilitating Breakthrough: How to Remove Obstacles, Bridge Differences, and Move Forward Together. So it focuses on this idea of facilitation, but I'm redefining facilitation not as some particular profession, but as the activity of helping people work together to affect change, with that role being played by leaders and managers and consultants and team members and coaches, and the argument, which I think is something that I'd like to talk about with you, because you have a broader view of the leadership and organizational world than I do, is to what extent is that moving from being a peripheral leadership skill to being a core leadership skill? And I guess the only thing I'd say by way of setting that up, or making the bridge between the previous 4 books and this 5th one, is that is the following idea: that there's more than one way to try to change things in the world, and there isn't one right way. My idea is that there's 4 basic ways of dealing with things not being the way you think they ought to be. You could try to force them to be the way you think they ought to be, and whether as an executive or an activist, or a government official, or a military dictator. So that has a role. The obvious difficulty with that is you try to force people to do things they don't want to do, they'll push back, and it may not work for very well or for very long. The second way is adapting. I don't like the way things are, but I can't make them the way I want them to be. I don't have the will or power to do that, and so I try to live with it as best I can. And people do that about lots of things every day. It's not unusual. The third way is exiting. I don't like the way things are. I'm not willing to live with them the way they are, and so I quit. Whether that's quitting my job, or getting a divorce, or emigrating, that's exiting. And in that context, collaboration is the 4th option. It's, I don't like things the way they are. I don't think I can force them to be the way I want them to be. I don't think I can live with them as they are. I can't exit, and therefore let me try to work with others, including others who I may not agree with or like or trust, in order to change the situation. And then the final piece of this, if I'm arguing that the role of collaboration is growing, the world needs more and better collaboration, and I'm defining facilitating as helping people collaborate, and therefore the world needs more and better facilitation. So that's sort of how I get. Now, I saved you from reading 4 previous books. That's it. And probably $30 in Amazon charges. So there you go.
Oh, thank you. No, that's fantastic, and I agree. From an organizational and leadership perspective, that's how I think of facilitation as well, and I think it's incredibly important. You alluded to the complex nature of societal challenges. The most perplexing and pervasive and persistent challenges that we face. There's a reason why they are so challenging, and it's because they're complex, they're messy, they're nuanced, and there aren't easy answers, right? If there was an easy answer, it would be solved and we would move on to the next thing. And yet that doesn't happen. So we need to take systems approaches, holistic approaches, to try to drive meaningful change. And that can only happen as you bring together diverse stakeholders and perspectives to talk through the issues at hand, right? Even when you may not trust them, even when you may be ideologically, completely opposed to them.
Yeah.
You still have to be willing and able to reach across the aisle to have that dialogue and to facilitate those types of conversations if we have any hope of really driving meaningful systemic change. And in my mind, as we were preparing for this episode today, and I was thinking about this whole idea about leadership and facilitation and the importance of that. I think of just the nature of the world today, the polarization in politics, for example, in the U.S. Now, it's not just in the U.S. that we have this issue, but it's certainly pervasive in the U.S. And how can we have even a reasonable conversation over really important issues? And that ability for the average person to have a good conversation with someone who completely disagrees with them, it seems like that's just taken a nosedive in recent years.
Yeah.
And so whether we're talking about society at large, we're talking within organizations, when there's divisions and perspectives and attitudes around policies, practices, procedures, whatever the case may be, I'm not so sure we've gotten any better at how we do this. And I think we've actually gotten quite a bit worse at how we do this. And so more important than ever in my mind is the ability of good leadership to play that role, to be peacekeepers, to bring people together, to facilitate conversations, to empower people, to bring their perspectives to the table, to feel psychologically safe to do so, et cetera. And if leaders don't do that, then the problem just gets perpetuated, and in many cases gets deepened, and then it's going to be even harder to overcome.
Yeah. So I think you've raised a crucial aspect of the story, which is it's not just that issues of economics or healthcare or education or economic development or climate change are complex and difficult. In addition to that, the differences amongst stakeholders are becoming more severe. Now, you could say that that's partly as a result of a positive development, which is more people have voice and the ability to make what they care about heard, and people are less willing to just go along with things than they might have been. And in addition to that, we're seeing increasing fragmentation and polarization, bubbles, and worse than that, demonization. It's not just that I see things different. I see that you see things differently than me. It's that you're wrong. It's actually not just that you're wrong. It's that you're bad. It's not just that you're bad. You're actually the devil. And how could you're evil with the devil? You're evil. So I call that demonization or enemifying, the ability or the tendency to take ordinary differences and make them matters of life and death. Somebody pointed out to me last week that the kind of reactivity that we saw on social media, we now see in real life meetings. People just immediately giving a thumbs up or a thumbs down in real life. So yes, I do see the role of leaders as if you're going to lead more than yourself, by definition, you have to bring people together, and less and less can that be done by just telling people what to do. And therefore, the idea of the leader as facilitator is crucial. Now, I should say one thing that maybe will help people understand where I'm coming from, that my evening job is writing, because I like reflecting and trying to understand, how does this stuff work? But my day job is actually facilitating such groups on complex issues. And, I did it for the first time 30 years ago in South Africa between white and black, opposition and establishment, communist and capitalist, politicians, business people, trade unionists, community people, and in Colombia during the Civil War, and on climate change issues globally, and with indigenous and settler communities in North America. So when I say it can be done, I'm not offering a theory. I'm describing my experience of hundreds of such processes that bring together actors who agree on some things and disagree on other things, and trust each other on some stuff and don't trust each other on other stuff, but who, whether they like it or not, or even if they don't like it, are faced with a situation that none of them can resolve alone, and therefore they need to at least try to resolve it alone. And so when I talk about a practice and theory of facilitation, of how do you facilitate breakthrough, this is not just a conceptual exercise. This is based on, a lot of trial and error.
Yeah, thank you for that. And certainly you're pointing out, some of the really challenging places around the world where we've needed this type of facilitation, peacekeeping and peacemaking and dialogue and such. And that's, of course, super important at a societal level. But let's not forget that these same processes happen within organizations every day, right? You have political camps within organizations. You have power dynamics and political games that happen within organizations. Like these same sorts of things happen within any organization, each and every day. It's just the nature of getting people together, and interacting with each other as these types of things emerge. So as we think about, facilitating leadership within an organizational setting, say I'm an executive or a senior level manager, I have teams of people that report to me, or other managers even that report to me. How do I start the process of shifting my thinking? Say I naturally think more in terms of a command control, autocratic leadership kind of a style, yet I recognize that isn't going to serve me well today. It's not going to serve my teams well. How do I start to make the shift towards more facilitative, empowering type of a leader? And what are some of the specific things I could start doing and enacting within my teams so that we can bridge divides and start to, leverage the diversity that we have within the organization?
Well, I think it's a crucial question because in many, if not most organizations and organizational cultures, the default mode is, command and control is has a pejorative connotation, but the default mode is hierarchical. And if that's working for you, God bless. But my observation is it works less and less of the time for the two reasons we've been discussing, because the situations require more people to be involved and because more people insist on being involved, whether they're employees or community members or politicians. Or environmentalists. And so I think the first bridge to be crossed is to recognize that the default doesn't work, or works much less often than it used to. That's and so you can keep pushing the default button, but you're going to get less and less good results. I guess if I had to emphasize one thing, which I think is the most important thing and is simple but not easy, I would say work on listening. Because most of the time, for many of us, including me, I'm not really listening. I'm waiting for your mouth to stop moving so that I can go back to telling you the truth about the way things are. And I'm not even really aware that there's any truth outside my thinking about how things are. And so that shift from what Otto Scharmer calls downloading to debating, where I recognize that there's different ways of looking at this, and we're going to decide which of us is right and which of us is wrong, to dialoguing, which is where we're going to try to see this through see what is unfolding through the perspectives of different ones of us, to what he calls presencing, being fully present to the situation as it is arising. Anyhow, this is a complicated way of saying that the single biggest leverage is to shift out of downloading. And years ago, I had a colleague who said, if you want a simple way to remember this, just put, when you find yourself pounding the table, just put at the front of your sentence, in my opinion. Just a little reminder to me and to you that, like, I do have a point of view about this, but it's in my opinion. And if that doesn't work, try in my humble opinion. And it's a joke in a way, but also that actually takes you out of downloading. It reminds you that, yes, I do have a way of thinking about what is happening or should happen or what we ought to do about it. But it's a perspective. Now and that's the beginning of facilitating breakthrough.
Yeah, I like that. And the listening is always the starting point, I think. And if you're not actively listening, like you're describing, then people don't feel valued. They don't feel that you trust them. They don't feel seen and heard. They don't feel understood. And that has to be the foundation upon which we build compromise and, move things in a collaborative direction. And the greater the distrust between parties, the more that's important, right? And to build trust, I mean, there's so much we could talk about in terms of building trust through this facilitative process. But I was sitting in a class. I was in a graduate course years ago, a couple decades ago, and they had a senior negotiator. He was a union negotiator who came into the class. It was an executive HR course, and he was talking about how to be a successful negotiator. And a lot of his advice was counterintuitive, and much of it was centered around what you've just been talking about with me these past 20 plus minutes. And he said, first and foremost, I have established a reputation as someone who's a straight shooter, who what I say is I'm not going to lie. I have integrity. What I say is truth, and I'm going to put my best foot forward. I'm going to listen. I'm going to try to find win solutions, so on and so forth. So he's describing all of this, and this is juxtaposition to other people who talk about power plays and negotiating and in those types of environments and such. And it was just eye-opening to me, and it has stuck with me ever since. That if you want like good sustainable results, then you have to build it on foundations of trust that is built upon, mutual accountability and listening and understanding. And that's what this gentleman conveyed to the class these many decades ago. And that's what I haven't seen sometimes when I see other people take different types of approaches. They might have short-term wins, but the long-term sustainability of what they're trying to accomplish is usually undermined by the tactics that they take to get those short-term wins. And so let's be more long-term and strategic about how we're approaching facilitation within our organizations and within our teams. And you may only be in that position for a year. Your team, you're going to have turnover. You may have people leave. And so, it's not like we're going to have the same core group of people together for 30 years. That's not, what the modern workplace looks like at all. But I like to have the attitude that I will act as if I'm going to work with these people for the next 30 years. And if that's my attitude, then I'm going to approach them very differently. I'm not going to manipulate. I'm not going to try to undermine. I'm going to focus on trust and relationships and making sure that I understand where they're coming from. Right. Yeah. And that's just a very different starting place to come to the difficult, sticky dynamics than when you approach it from, an adversarial point of view, starting with a fixed pie mentality, and you're going to try to figure out how much you can get away with. Right. And that's unfortunately what often happens.
So I, years ago, took a course from Roger Fisher, who's a Harvard negotiation professor, author of the all-time best-selling book on negotiation, Getting to Yes. And I remember Fisher saying, he wasn't telling us to be trusting, he was telling us to be trustworthy. Yeah, I would put it another way, say the same thing in another way, because I work a lot on how we can resolve issues in a city or in a country. And I've played with the following. In English, the word we use, or the most important word in peace building, is the word coexistence. That's a very popular word in that field. In Spanish, they use a slightly different word. They say convivencia, which means living together. It's the same word used for a couple living together. So yes, how do we approach things, whether it's in a community or on planet Earth, with the understanding that, like it or not, we're going to be living together for a long time, and how can we make that work? So yes, I think there is very much a short-term versus long-term perspective, and I don't think bossing people about or manipulating them has got much future.
No, it doesn't. You might get that short-term win, but you're just undermining your abilities in the long term. Adam, this has just been a really fun conversation. We could go on and on and on, but I know at the time, and I'm going to have to let you go here in just a minute. Before we wrap up for today, though, I wanted to give you a chance to share with listeners how they can get connected with you, find out more about your work, where they can find your books, and then give us a final word on the topic for today.
Yeah, well, the way to find out about the books and the work that I've been talking about is to look at the website of the organization I'm a director of. It's called Rios Partners, REOS Partners.com, riospartners.com. And included there, you'll also see the references to my books, including this final one, or this most recent one, Facilitating Breakthrough. The final word, I would just want to underline what I said before. I think given the challenges we face in our organizations and in our communities and on our planet, the world needs more and better collaboration, and therefore more and better facilitation. And that's what I'm trying to support through this work and through this writing.
Wonderful. Thank you, Adam. It has been a pleasure. I encourage listeners to reach out, get connected, find out more about what Adam and his team can do for you. Check out the books. And as always, I hope everyone can stay healthy and safe, that you can find meaning and purpose at work each and every day. And I hope you all have a great week. Thanks again for joining us for this episode of the Human Capital Innovations Podcast. I hope you stay healthy and safe and that you have a great week.